Your soulmate sister is talking about you with two other women. They are gossiping everywhere that you look like a... Something shifted in a conversation that was never supposed to matter, until one unexpected sentence made the entire room go silent. Three women sat around a small café table, coffee growing cold while whispers grew louder. Your soulmate's sister leaned forward first. The other two exchanged curious glances. Then she smiled in a way that suggested she knew something everyone else didn't. You know who they remind me of? She asked. She never finished the sentence immediately. She let the silence stretch. One woman guessed. The other laughed softly. But when your soulmate sister finally revealed who she thought you looked like, the reaction wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't simple gossip anymore. It became the beginning of a story that traveled much farther than any of them imagined. And one tiny detail hidden inside that conversation would soon explain why your name kept appearing in places where you had never even been. Stay with this, because the next few moments reveal what nobody around the table understood at first. The conversation drifted from curiosity into fascination. One woman insisted your face reminded her of someone unforgettable, not because of perfect features, but because of the calm confidence you carried without realizing it. Another woman disagreed completely. She claimed it wasn't your appearance at all. It was the way people reacted when you entered a room, almost as if they recognized a familiar character from a favorite movie they couldn't quite remember. Your soulmate's sister folded her arms and watched them debate. She wasn't laughing anymore. Instead, she seemed almost surprised that a casual remark had sparked such passionate opinions. As strangers walked past outside the café windows, the discussion became more animated. Every comparison revealed something deeper than looks. Someone mentioned kindness hidden behind quiet eyes. Someone else noticed resilience. Another described a rare presence that made people feel comfortable without a single word being spoken. Before anyone realized it, they had stopped talking about appearance entirely. They were talking about the impression you left behind. That unexpected shift changed the atmosphere around the table. But there's another layer to this story that almost everyone missed. Not long after they left the café, those conversations began echoing in places they never intended. One woman shared the story with a friend. Another repeated it during lunch the next day. Each version sounded slightly different, yet one surprising detail stayed exactly the same. Every person who heard your name became curious enough to ask another question. Who are they? Have you met them? What are they really like? Without planning it, your soulmate's sister had started something much bigger than neighborhood chatter. She found herself thinking about that conversation again later that evening, wondering why she couldn't stop replaying it in her mind. It wasn't because of the comparison anymore. It was because everyone had reacted so differently once they imagined meeting you themselves. Somewhere else, completely unaware of those discussions, another important piece of the puzzle quietly fell into place. And what happens next doesn't begin with another rumor, it begins with someone deciding they need to discover the truth for themselves. A quiet decision was made before sunrise, and almost no one noticed it. One of the women from that café woke up still thinking about the conversation, unable to shake the curiosity that had followed her home. She replayed every word your soulmate's sister had said, wondering why such an ordinary comparison had carried so much emotion. It no longer felt like simple gossip. It felt like an unfinished story waiting for its missing chapter. Instead of repeating another rumor, she chose to learn more for herself. She paid attention to the little stories people shared about you, noticing that they all described the same quality in different ways. Some spoke about your calm confidence. Others remembered your kindness in small moments that most people would have forgotten. The more she listened, the more she realized that the image created by gossip didn't match the real impression left by those who had actually crossed paths with you. That discovery spread quietly through the same circle that had once laughed over coffee. Curiosity replaced assumptions. Even your soulmate sister found herself wondering if she had judged too quickly. Before the afternoon ended, someone looked at her and asked, "Have you ever spoken with them yourself, or have you only repeated what you heard?" That single question changed her expression completely. If this story has drawn you in so far, I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoy stories that unfold one layer at a time, consider subscribing so you don't miss what happens next. As the days moved forward, your soulmate sister became unusually quiet whenever your name appeared. She noticed something she had overlooked before: every conversation about you somehow ended with admiration instead of criticism. The comparison she had made at the café was now taking on a completely different meaning. One woman admitted she had expected someone completely different after hearing the gossip, but reality had surprised her. Another smiled and confessed that the first impression people carried wasn't based on appearance at all, it came from the peaceful energy and genuine attention you gave others. That realization spread naturally. Nobody argued anymore. Instead, they began asking questions about your interests, your dreams, and the moments that had shaped your character. Even the smallest details became meaningful. Your soulmate sister sat through those discussions, saying very little, but every thoughtful comment seemed to challenge the picture she had painted in her own mind. There was one unforgettable moment when she caught herself defending you without even realizing it. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and the two women exchanged surprised glances. They didn't tease her. They simply smiled, as if they had been expecting that change all along. What happened next was even more unexpected, because the conversation was no longer about whether you looked like someone, it became about why your presence lingered in people's hearts long after they had walked away. Later that evening, your soulmate happened to hear fragments of those conversations without anyone realizing it. They weren't standing close enough to catch every sentence, but they heard enough to understand that your name had become the center of an entirely different discussion. Instead of hearing laughter, they noticed thoughtful pauses. Instead of judgment, they heard genuine curiosity. Your soulmate sister was explaining that perhaps first impressions could be misleading, and that there was far more to a person than a single comparison made over coffee. Those words carried a quiet honesty that no one expected from her. Your soulmate remained silent, but a small smile appeared that they couldn't hide. They realized something important had shifted. Not because someone had proven a point, but because people had allowed themselves to see beyond assumptions. Yet just as everyone believed the story had settled, one final comment drifted across the room and stopped every conversation again. A woman who had been listening quietly from the beginning finally spoke up and said, "There's something about this person that none of you have noticed yet, and once you see it, you'll understand why this entire conversation happened in the first place." The room fell silent again, and every eye turned toward her, waiting for the revelation that would change everything. A single breath filled the room before anyone answered. The woman who had quietly listened from the beginning placed her cup on the table and looked at each face one by one, as though choosing her words carefully. "You're all talking about how this person looks," she said softly, "but that's not why people remember them." The smiles around the table faded into thoughtful silence. She explained that she had watched countless conversations begin with appearance but end with character. "People notice the face for a moment," she continued, "but they remember how they felt after meeting someone." Those words settled over the room like the final piece of a puzzle. Your soulmate's sister lowered her eyes, realizing she had spent so much time repeating comparisons that she had never truly asked who you were beneath them. One of the other women nodded slowly and admitted she had already begun seeing the same pattern. "Every story about you seemed to end with someone describing kindness, patience, or quiet confidence rather than physical features." That realization transformed the mood completely. The discussion was no longer about gossip. It had become a search for the truth behind the impression you left on people. Stay close, because the next unexpected encounter would test whether those words were really true. Only a few days later, chance created the moment none of them expected. Your soulmate's sister happened to be in the same bookstore where you stopped to browse through a shelf of novels. She recognized you instantly, but you had no idea she was there. Instead of approaching you immediately, she simply observed from a distance. She noticed how naturally you smiled at the elderly cashier, how patiently you stepped aside to let a family pass, and how easily you thanked someone who handed you a book that had slipped from the shelf. None of those moments were dramatic, yet together they painted a picture completely different from the one created around that café table. She realized there was nothing rehearsed about your behavior. You weren't trying to impress anyone because you didn't even know you were being watched. That quiet authenticity lingered in her thoughts long after you walked out of the store. Later that afternoon, when the two women asked if she had seen you, she surprised even herself by saying, "I think we misunderstood them." Neither woman interrupted. They simply waited as she searched for the right words. For the first time, she wasn't describing how you looked. She was describing how your presence made an ordinary afternoon feel unexpectedly peaceful. Meanwhile, your soulmate sensed that something around them had subtly changed, even without knowing why. Familiar names surfaced in conversation with unusual warmth, and small coincidences kept leading back to you. It felt as though invisible threads were quietly connecting people who had once viewed the same story from completely different angles. Your soulmate's sister couldn't ignore that feeling anymore. She replayed every rumor she had repeated and compared it with what she had witnessed herself, and the difference was impossible to dismiss. Then, just when she decided she should finally speak with you directly instead of relying on second-hand opinions, her phone lit up with a message from one of the women. It contained only a single sentence: "You need to hear what your brother said about them today." She stared at the screen without opening the rest of the conversation, knowing that whatever came next had the power to reshape everything she believed, not through gossip, not through assumptions, but through someone who knew the truth far better than anyone sitting around that café table. The message stayed unopened for several minutes, not because your soulmate's sister wasn't curious, but because she sensed that once she read it, there would be no returning to the comfortable assumptions she had been carrying. When she finally tapped the screen, the words were surprisingly simple. He said they've never tried to prove themselves to anyone. That's why people slowly discover who they really are. She read the sentence again, and then a third time. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't exaggerated. Yet it explained everything she had witnessed over the past few days. Your soulmate had never defended you in loud conversations or argued with people who misunderstood you. Instead, they quietly believed that time would reveal your character better than any explanation ever could. That confidence stayed with her all afternoon. As she walked through familiar streets, she realized that every rumor had depended on quick judgments, while every genuine compliment had come from people who actually spent time with you. The difference was impossible to ignore. Before this story continues, if you're enjoying the journey and these cinematic stories keep you guessing, consider sharing it with someone who loves meaningful storytelling, and subscribing so you don't miss the next chapter that changes everything. That evening, the same three women found themselves together once again, but this conversation felt nothing like the first one. There was no laughter aimed at appearances. No whispered comparisons. Instead, they spoke about how easily people can mistake first impressions for the whole story. Your soulmate's sister surprised everyone by admitting, "I think I focused on the wrong thing from the beginning." The other two exchanged knowing smiles, almost as if they had been waiting for her to say those words. One of them leaned forward and confessed that after hearing so many positive experiences, she had begun paying attention to something unusual. Every person who genuinely knew you described a different quality, yet all of those qualities somehow fit together perfectly. One mentioned your patience. Another remembered your quiet confidence. Someone else admired your ability to make others feel comfortable without asking for attention. Piece by piece, the image created by gossip disappeared, replaced by something much more authentic. For the first time, your soulmate's sister didn't feel embarrassed about changing her opinion. She felt relieved. She understood that changing your mind after learning the truth isn't weakness, it's growth. And just when they believed the conversation had reached its natural ending, an unexpected visitor walked into the café and recognized your name immediately. The newcomer paused for a moment after hearing your name, then smiled with unmistakable recognition. "Are you talking about the same person I met a few months ago?" they asked. The table fell silent again, but this silence felt different. It was filled with anticipation instead of judgment. They pulled out a chair and shared a story no one around the table had ever heard before, a simple moment where you had offered encouragement without expecting anything in return. It wasn't a grand gesture, yet it had stayed with them long after that day ended. As they finished speaking, your soulmate's sister looked around the table and noticed something remarkable. No one was comparing your appearance anymore. No one cared about the old gossip. Every face reflected genuine curiosity about the person behind the stories. At that exact moment, her phone vibrated once more. This time, the message wasn't from one of the women. It was from your soulmate. The preview revealed only a few words before the rest disappeared behind the notification. "I finally think it's time for everyone to know." The notification remained on the screen for only a few seconds, but it carried the kind of weight that changes the atmosphere without making a sound. Your soulmate's sister looked at it, then slowly locked her phone again. She wasn't ready to open it in front of everyone. The curiosity around the table became impossible to hide. One of the women noticed the expression on her face and quietly asked, "Is everything okay?" She smiled, almost nervously, and replied, "I think we're about to learn something we've all been missing." A few moments later, she stepped outside into the cool evening air and finally opened the message. It wasn't long. It simply said, "I've listened to every opinion, every assumption, and every rumor. But none of them tell the real story. The truth isn't about how someone looks. It's about the way they make people feel when no one is watching." She stood still after reading it, realizing those words perfectly matched everything she had discovered over the past few days. Suddenly, every conversation at the café, every unexpected compliment, and every quiet observation connected into one clear picture. The gossip had never been the ending of the story. It had only been the beginning of a lesson about first impressions. When she returned inside, the mood had completely shifted. Instead of asking what the message said, the women simply watched her expression. She pulled out a chair, smiled softly, and admitted that she wished she had asked questions before forming opinions. The honesty in her voice surprised everyone. One of the women laughed gently and confessed that she had done the same thing more times than she could count. Another nodded and said that people often remember the loudest rumor instead of the quiet truth. Their conversation turned into something unexpectedly meaningful. They spoke about the difference between appearance and character, assumptions and experience, first impressions and lasting memories. As they reflected on the past few days, it became clear that every person who had genuinely interacted with you described the same thing, a calm presence that made ordinary moments feel warmer and more genuine. No one could point to a single dramatic event that explained it. It was the collection of countless small moments that created a lasting impression. The café that had once echoed with casual gossip now felt like a place where understanding had quietly replaced speculation. Just as everyone prepared to leave, the café owner, who had overheard fragments of every conversation throughout the week, walked over with a friendly smile. Wiping the counter with a towel, they said, "You know what's interesting? People come in here every day talking about someone's appearance, success, or reputation. But months later, those details are forgotten. The stories people remember are always about kindness, patience, and the way someone treated another person." Those words settled over the group with surprising clarity. Your soulmate's sister looked toward the window, watching the evening lights reflect across the glass, and realized that this entire journey had quietly changed her perspective. She no longer wondered who you looked like. She wondered what she might discover by knowing you for herself. And somewhere else, completely unaware that these conversations had unfolded, another unexpected meeting was already beginning, one that neither of you had planned, but that would finally replace every rumor with a real conversation.